right, fourth graders, today we're going to be working on some paintings inspired by Wayne Thiebaud's food paintings. We are going to work on painting realistically by adding details and light and shadow. First, we're going to plan to draw out our food. You can choose whatever kind of food you want. You can also do a beverage, like my original sample was a milkshake. I am going to draw a pizza slice. So the first thing you want to do is think about what is the shape of your pizza slice. And it's a triangle. And again, if you're doing a different food, think about its basic shapes. I have drawn my pizza large. You want to fill as much of your space as possible so that you can get details into your pizza or your other food without having to make the details super tiny. So on the back of my triangle, I'm actually going to create a wiggly line because that's going to be my sauce line. And I want to make sure my pizza is three-dimensional. So since my pizza is a slice, it's going to have some depth. So I'm going to add a little bit of depth to the crust and trace the line for the bottom of the pizza. I also want the back part of my crust, so I'm going to put a little raised area there because it's like the puffy part of my crust. And I'm going to connect it. Oops, I missed a little bit. And I'm also going to connect this bottom part down here. So as you can see, that kind of looks like pizza already. I didn't do a lot of fancy details. So I'm going to try to add some pepperonis. If you would make a pizza, you can add whatever kind of toppings you want, mushrooms, macaroni and cheese, I don't know. So I'm going to add a few pepperonis onto mine. I made them partial circles because sometimes when you slice up your pizza, it gets cut and your pepperonis aren't whole anymore. And I really like gooey pizza, so I'm going to make it so that my cheese is extra gooey by adding this line to make it look like my cheese is just melting. So I'm going to erase away the extra marks right in there. And just like magic, they are gone. So it looks like my cheese is dripping over the edge. Once your food is drawn, I apologize for coughing. Once your food is drawn, you're going to think about the surface that you want it on. I don't really want to eat my pizza right off of a dirty table, so I'm going to add a plate. My plate is going to look like it's coming behind it and not directly on top like a straight overhead view, because maybe I'm looking at it a little bit of an angle. So I'm going to draw my plate around my pizza and kind of let it overlap a little. But a plate for a pizza is going to have a little bit of a lip around it. A lip just means a wider edge that you can use to hold on to it. And I'm even going to add a little line to mark a basin. And that basin part of the plate is just the bottom part, but it should sort of line up with where the lip of your plate is matching. But my plate should not be floating in the air. So just like I overlapped my plate with my pizza, I'm going to add a table line that overlaps with my plate so that it looks like the table goes behind my plate. So up here is going to end up being a wall, and down here is going to end up being my table when I add my colors. Okay, so just for some other ideas, I have also painted a cake. If you can look at the simple shapes here, we've got an oval for the top and then a rectangle for the bottom. You want to make sure that that line matches the oval for the bottom of the cake. And then for some simple details, I just added a curvy line top and bottom to make that fluffy frosting. So it can look like it's complicated, but it's really just adding different types of lines. I added some simple rectangles for some candles, painted stripes for the background. Another food that I've made a sample of, I have not painted it, would be a hamburger and a drink. So I did a half circle for the bun. I did some little ovals, those would be tomatoes. Okay, I made this wiggly line here to resemble the lettuce, that would be painted green. I put some little curved triangles to be the cheese that's flopping over. And here is the hamburger bun, which is just an overlapped oval, and then a half rectangle for the bottom bun. Instead of a plate, I put it on a wrapper, which ends up being a square, but I've made it kind of wiggly, like it's been unwrapped from its burger. And then I did another cylinder for a cup. So they're very simple details, but they're little things that can make it look more realistic. That helps you get some ideas. Now that my food has been drawn, I'm going to think about what colors I want to add to it. I'm going to be using watercolor paints today, and so that's how you can add some of your details without having it all done with your drawing. So I am going to look at my watercolors, and I'm going to want to use my yellow today because cheese is sometimes kind of yellow. So I noticed that my yellow paint is really dirty. So what I'm going to do to clean that is I'm going to dip my brush in the water, okay, wipe it off on the edge, and I'm just going to swirl my brush around in that yellow, and it's going to clean itself off. But because I have that dirty paint water in there, I just want to clean my brush. So I'm going to tap my brush all the way on the bottom at least 3 times, wipe the drip off, okay? And now my brush should be clean. So I'm going to take my yellow, swirl it, swirl it, swirl it to wake up your paint, and you're going to paint your pizza the way that you want it to. But if you have too much water on it, I want you to watch out, because sometimes your paint can, we call it bleed, when you have too much water on it. It also makes your colors not as bright, which you might want on purpose. So if you're making a strawberry milkshake or something that's going to be a lighter color and you don't have that, like if you don't have a pink, you're probably just want to have a lot of water on your brush and not as much paint. But you have to just be careful, because sometimes too much water can make your colors run together. And I might show you what that looks like later. So I'm going to finish painting my cheese, and then I will do the next step. Right, now that my cheese is painted, I'm going to move on to some of the details. You may have noticed that we're using a smaller brush today. The reason for the smaller brush is because you can control the details a lot better than with the bigger green brushes. So the way that you can use that for your details is just using the tip of your brush. You never want your paintbrush scooching on its bottom, because then you just get really messy lines. If you use the tippy top of your brush, you have more control. So if you notice, I now have less paint on my brush and more water, so I'm getting pink. And I don't really want pink pepperoni. It doesn't really sound tasty, okay? So I just went into the paint without going back into the water to get a little bit of a brighter color there. Right now I'm just using straight out of the watercolor pan colors. Eventually we are going to learn how to mix colors as well to make special colors that we don't have. So I just want to get my pepperonis added. My color is blending a little bit into my yellow, but I can kind of fix that a little bit later. But I kind of want to add a little sauce dripping out of the edge here, so I'm just going to add a little bit of red up here, not even all the way, just parts of it. Now I'm going to clean my brush. Now I want to make a special color for my crust, because if I use just brown, it kind of makes it look like my crust is burnt. So I want to have a lighter color than just brown. So I'm actually going to start with orange for my crust, and I'll show you why later. So I'm going to paint my entire crust orange, remembering I am using the tip of my brush to try to stay in those smaller spaces as best as I can. I want to paint all those spaces even if they dry, because watercolor reactivates when you get it wet, which is the magical thing why it's called watercolor. I'm going to paint this whole crust with orange. Even this part here, even though it's gonna look like they're the same color and they shouldn't be. So as you can see, I have a little too much water there and the red is starting to bleed into the crust. Now that that is all painted with orange, I'm gonna go over parts of it with a little bit of brown. I want it to start out being a watery brown, just so I can see what's happening. And that just kind of didn't change it very much, so I'm gonna add a little bit more. I know I didn't wash my brush out that time, but there was really no paint on my brush. Okay, so that's kind of adding that golden, tasty crust color. Okay, and I can do that, and I can even just do it in some parts. I don't even have to do it on all of them. Okay, and then it's going to actually make it look more realistic if you don't paint every spot with that darker color. You can kind of let it fade a little bit. So I actually just added water to my brush over here, and I want to smear that brown paint just a little bit, and that kind of lightens it up. I also want to put a little bit of lighter crust right here at the bottom, because we're going to say that my light's coming from there. So now it should look a little bit more like a realistic looking pizza, but my cheese is just a little too yellow. So I'm gonna do the same thing I just did with my crust actually, is I'm gonna add some orange and then some brown to make it look like my cheese has cooked, and because I like my cheese a little bit crispy. I'm gonna add some little orange spots just to make it look like that part of the cheese got cooked a little differently. Clean out my brush. Add a little brown on top. And I think it's just gonna help it look more like a realistic, extra crispy cooked pizza. So now that my red has dried a little bit, I'm actually gonna go back in with another layer of it just to make the red just look even redder, because pepperonis are quite bright of a color. A lot of extra on there. And that's one way to add shadow, is just by layering more of the same color. Just makes it look a little bit darker. But if you want it even darker, what you would do is you would add a darker color to it. I don't want to always just add black to make something darker, because it's going to make your colors look really muddy. So if you think about the rainbow, and I'm going to cover up black and brown, if you think about the rainbow, the color that's darker than red, if you go backwards on the color wheel, is actually going to be purple. Purple is going to help red get dark without getting it too much darker, because red is part of purple, so that's going to help. So I'm just going to take some of it out of this pepperoni and put it back into this one. It's going to help create that shadow idea, make it three-dimensional pepperoni. If it's too dark, I can just add a little water, making sure to wipe the extra drippies off. I can always go back in with red to soften it a little. There we go, I softened that one up. That one was getting too dark. So now I have my pizza the way that I want it, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to do our background. So I'm going to show you how to paint our plate to make it look realistic, to paint our table and our wall.